In this demonstration, I'll be showing you how we can get your ITPs from Word format or Excel format into CivilPro and then configuring them within CivilPro so that they're functional in the platform. By the end of the session, you'll have ITPs that are ready to go, assigned to lots and used as those interactive checklists. Firstly, it's important to recognize that various contractors have different ways of presenting their information on their ITPs, be that in columns or in rows. CivilPro has got a fixed number of columns that we expect when we're importing data into CivilPro. So an exercise that may have to be undertaken prior to getting underway here is to organize your existing ITP columns into ones that align with the ones that CivilPro will be expecting to import. So this may take some moving around of data within Excel or merging some items within Excel so that they align with the CivilPro import columns. In addition, we can create custom registers to provide additional columns within the ITPs, but I'll leave a link on how we can do that below as that's a more advanced feature. All right, here we are within the lot register in CivilPro. To get to our ITPs, we'll navigate to Options, Spec and Conformance, ITPs. We'll create a new ITP. I'll call this Drainage. To note here, any of this data can be edited for an unapproved ITP, so you can come back to this. We've now created our ITP, and now we're looking to import data into CivilPro. So we're going to jump now to our Word version of our ITP. Here is a typical ITP in Word format. Your columns may be different, but the process will still be the same. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to select everything that's in this table, copy that to the clipboard, open a new instance of Excel to navigate to the top corner and paste that information. So as we can see here, when it pastes in, we can see that we've got some merged cells and then some separate rows in here. The first thing we need to do is get rid of all merged cells because that will cause an issue with import into CivilPro. Click Merge and Center. Now the issue that we've got is we've got separate list items are in separate rows. So when we import that into CivilPro as it is on the screen here, it will mean that every single list item is a separate row within our ITP, which is not what we want. So we've got to do some formatting here to get everything that's relative to this activity step in this instance into a single row. So I'll show you what that process looks like. Select, Control X, click the cell above, select, Alt Enter, paste. Control A, Control X, Alt Enter, paste. Ignore if it says symbols as we've got here because we'll format this into the text. I'm not quite sure why this does this by default in Excel. Now that we've got everything into a single row here that will be represented in a row in our ITP, we can get rid of the additional rows. I'm going to continue to do this for all of the rows within this ITP. So that I can show you what will occur if we don't do that formatting ahead of time, I'm going to leave the remainder of this ITP as is, and I'll show you what that looks like when we come into CivilPro. So as I mentioned, just to make sure we don't have any of these symbols artifacts coming through in CivilPro, we'll select all, and we'll just select Arial. And don't worry too much about the font in here. Once we get into CivilPro, we can then format the font size, and the font color in CivilPro. So now I'm going to save this. After we've saved this file, I'm just going to show you how we can import from the clipboard. So I'll highlight all of the information in this register here. Hold down Shift, click the bottom, Control C. Now we're back in the web app and we've got that data on our clipboard. We're going to navigate to the top right, Import Specification Details. Here we can either import a CSV file if we've saved our Excel as a CSV file, or we can click Import from Clipboard. Here we can see CivilPro has pulled in all of the data and it has tried to assign columns based on the headers in that data that we had sitting in Excel. If it's done it wrong, no worries, we can update that in here. So now I'm going to assign the columns for CivilPro to match the ones that were from our original ITPs. To note here as well, we consider these stages or activity steps as a reference text in CivilPro. Reference text is a column that can be used for a range of things. There might be activity steps, it might denote whether it's a hold point explicitly. So that's just a freely assignable column that we can use. So we'll assign reference text here. I'll now populate each of these columns based on the data that we've pulled in here. Here we've pulled in whether it's a hold point or a witness point from our data. Don't worry, we're going to assign these within CivilPro. Data looks good, I'm going to click import. Here we can see our data has imported well. We can see that there is some formatting to do in here that CivilPro hasn't assigned automatically, so we can edit each of these cells as we go down the page here. To also note in here as well, we are currently in the ITP view, and we can get to that by clicking this views column here. You can see ITP. We can choose a number of other pre-baked views as well when we're setting this up to see how this ITP will look when it becomes a checklist, when it's assigned to a lot. We can also create our own view for setting up ITPs, so we can see all of the information that we're setting up as we go. So I'm going to do that now, and you can follow along if you want. What I added there was the inspect, verify, and authority required columns. These are used further down the track where we denote whether it is a check item, a verify item, or an approved item once this is used as a checklist. So ticking these boxes will make those check boxes become visible on the ultimate checklists that we create. We'll come back to that shortly. Right, now I have got this view that I can use when I'm setting up. So now the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to work my way down this item type column. Here is where we can denote whether this line item is a quality item, safety, environmental, community, etc., or a heading. Heading is one I'm looking for because this line item here heading is the one I'm looking for this line item because this is a heading in our ITP. Because if we jump back to our Excel, we can see in here this is a heading line. So now I'll work down. I won't be changing most of these. I'll just keep an eye out for headings and make sure I change those to headings. Now that I've added those two headings, I'll move into the next column, which is where we assign if the line item is a check, milestone, hold point, witness point, etc. So this will be where we refer back to our original ITPs to configure this correctly. On my keyboard, I'm using Alt-Tab to jump between the two. I'll just leave it there to save everyone time, but you'd continue the whole way down the page and assign all of your hold points, milestones, witness points, etc. The important part of assigning these is that when we're actually using this ITP as a checklist and we want to raise a hold point, the workflow that we have able to be selected at that time will look for a hold point workflow. Similarly, if this is denoted as a witness point, when we request an approval for a witness point, it will present to us the witness point workflows that we've got sitting within our project. Next thing we can do is update the reference text column. All of these cells from this point onwards, you can either edit directly in the cell, or if you want to do the formatting all in a similar window, you can click the open button on the right hand side here. Make sure we save. Here we can see all of the parts of that line item, so you may want to just format all of these in here. We select that quality type, whether it's a hold point. Here is that reference text header here. Here is where we edit the ITP description. So here, if we'd like to drop down a list, you can add that here. We can see that some of the formatting of the list as it was imported isn't that clean, so I'll remove the list items in here, drop down the list as expected, highlight the whole thing, and then add a bulleted list. Scrolling further down the page, we can see the clause here, put a comma in there, responsibility, the records, method of inspection, that wasn't imported, but you may have that available. That might be a survey or a test or a visual inspection, for example. The next thing we're going to do is navigate to the checklist template. Here is where we can toggle whether it is a inspect item, so that just requires the site engineer to say check this item to close this line item out, or if it requires a check and a verify. So this might be an internal supervisor that also has to check this item off. This would be the second column typically in a checklist. And finally, if we also wanted to require an approval for this line item, say as a hold point or a witness point, we would also tick this authority required box. Finally, if this line item does require a test to be undertaken, this is where we can add those tests. So if I click add test here, let's assume that this line item requires a compaction test. I can drop down this method here and find the compaction test that is within our test methods register. And you can find the test methods register in the QA setup menu, test methods. But here, I'm just going to type in nuclear. To note, there's a whole lot of these tests already sitting within the repository project in your database. So you can import to your test methods register from that repository project and get some of these common tests. So I'm going to say it's a nuclear pentameter test. It is based on the meters squared of the lot that I am testing. It is based on the lot area. Here is where I can input my testing frequencies based on the specification. So if a test is required, normal testing requirements is 1 per 500 square meters, I can add 500 here. If we have reduced testing requirements, we can add that testing amount here, so 1 per 1,000 square meters, and then we may have a minimum per lot, 4 and 4. In this compliance window here, this is where we can paste in the compliance targets for that test, or what must be satisfied in order for that test to comply. So here you can add things like your compaction targets. You may also want to put in some other parameters in here. So say this test was being applied to a sub-base layer, it may have certain requirements, and then if it was for another layer on that same pavement build-up, you might have different requirements. Here is just a free text box where you can articulate all of those different requirements. And this just means that when this checklist is being used out on the field, the engineer will have all of those testing compliance requirements on hand, so they know what they are putting into that test request and ultimately reviewing conformance against. I'll just leave it as is here. So now this line item has got this test and these frequencies baked into it and will be readily reportable further down the track. Save. So now we can see here that we have updated all of our information. If I click save, we sometimes have text that may or may not look as expected. Don't worry, further down the track we'll format everything and make it all look consistent. I won't go through and update each of these line items down here, but you can see to update these, you can click in the cell here as well and open this rich text editor. Similar to that previous window, we can do our editing in here. Again, we've got some messy artifacts that have come in from that import. Just clean those up, add a new list and push OK. Before you navigate away from this page, make sure that you click save. This ensures that all the data that we have in this, or the changes that we've made, are pushed back to the database, so that if we do any formatting going forward, that accurate, changed, formatted data will be ready for us to manipulate. If we don't click save, we won't see those changes making effect. Here we can scroll across as well and see those additional columns. We've got things like responsibility, records, inspection methodology. This included on ITP column, that's an additional one. If we untick this, it means that when we print this ITP using the printing icon here, it won't include that line item on the ITP. We've got an additional column in here that says included on checklist, similar to the include on ITP. If this is unticked and the include on ITP is still ticked, this line item will print on the ITP, but when we are printing the checklist, once this is applied to a lot, we won't see that item on the checklist if this is unticked. So this is just how you can manage where your data is presented. Another thing you can look into is alternative QVC text. This is a separate text column that if left blank, when this ITP is created into a checklist, it will just copy the text here into the checklist format. If we'd like to have more concise text on the checklist and more detailed information on ITP, you can change or add additional QVC text by opening this line item, going into checklist template, selecting this and putting the alternative checklists in here and then saving. What that will do is it will show that alternative QVC text in here. So this may be exhaustive over here, and this may just say undertake compaction tests. And this is what you'll see when you apply this ITP to a lot, and in doing so creating that checklist. Likely not used. I mentioned earlier, if we did want to have additional columns, like say testing timing, for example, we can also add custom registers. If we had created a custom register, it would be visible here, and we'd be able to drag that in and edit what was a part of that, or add information to that custom register. What you've got to be mindful of is that custom register column won't be in the default views when someone else opens up an ITP, or ultimately opens up the checklist when this ITP is assigned to a lot. They'll need to manually drag that custom register column and put it into their view, and then save their own default view to make sure they always see that column when they use it going forward. Cool, now I've got all the data in here. Once we have tidied up all of our rows and columns in here, we can also add images into here as well, or tables. Just copy and paste those from either Word, or paste your images in here as well, and you can paste those directly into the web, into that rich text viewer by clicking here. Assuming we've done all the formatting, everything's looking pretty good. Here, if we want to note whether each line item is a check, a verify, or an approve, we can just select these here. So for a check item, I'll just check the first box. For a hold point, I will click the first box. I'm going to have a supervisor review and get their signature, and then ultimately send an approval to my administrator. So this just toggles what is visible on the ultimate checklist that is produced. All right, now everything is looking good. I'm just going to save there again, assuming that I've formatted everything else. We can see that we've got some different text in here that I want to get rid of. The way I'm going to do that is select one, or I might want to select all if there are random text throughout the entire ITP. I can select as many as I want. In the top right corner, I can click Format Selected. Here I can select the font family, the size, and apply that to various parts of the things that we have edited so far. What looks good in CivilPro Web Application is the Segway UI. Font size, choose it yourself. 9 looks pretty good in the interface. I'm going to leave the color unchanged because I might have highlighted some things red or orange in here, and I don't want to overwrite those. I want to apply this text formatting to the reference text column, the description column, and also the tests, and that just updates that compliance field that we added in there, just so all of that text is consistent. I'll now click Save, and we can see those formatting changes have been fixed in here. Cool, so assuming we've done all of those steps and we have actually formatted the entire ITP, we should be ready to go. And I'll show you what this ITP looks like when it's applied as a checklist to a lot. So here I have selected a lot. I may have just created this one. Select the lot. In the related items panel here, I'm going to navigate to checklists. Here I'm going to navigate to the ITP that I just created and select plus. And we can see that a checklist has now been created based on that ITP that we set up earlier. So I'll show you what that looks like. Here we have that ITP. We can see the formatting that we applied. We applied it to this one here. So that's why colors are different further down the page. We can see that we have those checked, verified, and approved boxes ready to select based on the configurations that we had. We can also see that this one here has a test. We set up that test behind this line item here, so to investigate what that test is, I can click here, open the test panel, and here I can see that information on what test is required to satisfy that line item. I appreciate this test is not relevant to the line item, but it's just a demonstration. Here as well, in this checklist viewer, if we want to see various columns on the one screen when we land, we can easily tweak this ourselves by dragging and dropping various things in here, or even realigning columns to show the information that we want. Here is where you'd need to add those custom registers if you had those set up, so that you can show additional information that you want. Once you've set up all of these here, I advise opening the window for View, creating a view called Default, and that means every time you land in this platform, in this window, the columns that you previously selected and even filters that you applied will immediately be presented. So you get a consistent view when you get in here. So I've saved a default view here. I've also saved a view for a tablet so that it shows even less information, is more concise when I'm using a tablet out in the field. Now you're ready to go. So you can start closing things out in here. You can send for approvals here. And we can see once all of the available items are closed out in a line, that line will go green. We didn't configure these ones down here, and that's why CivilPro thinks those are already closed out.